The notion of world arises only when the spirit of inquiry is absent. But I am before the world was. How then do the notions of world, etc., bind me? So the notions of the world are stories that we have about the world, about the nature of the world, beliefs that we have about the world. We attach ourselves to these beliefs, but when we start looking into them, this attachment gets undermined. This is the spirit of inquiry. And I is consciousness. This I, this consciousness, is what is free from all these attachments. Attachments to these notions, these beliefs, these stories about the world. But we've got caught up in these stories. How did this happen? We've got caught up in these beliefs, these stories about the world and about our own personal identity. How then do the notions of world, etc., bind me? He who has thus realized the truth is free from all beginnings and all ends. Such a person is in the eye of the storm. It's like when you're practicing your spinning as a whirling dervish. You're not focusing on the world that is spinning around. You're focused on the still center. He who is thus equipped with the spirit of non-duality, as if he's in deep sleep though awake, is not disturbed though actively engaged in life. Such a person is liberated here and now. What appears to be the world here is truly the magic, the work of the infinite consciousness. It's magical, miraculous, the stream of experiencing, the eternal becoming. There is no unity here, nor is there duality. My instructions too are of the same nature. The words, their meaning, the disciple, the wish or the effort of the disciple, and the Guru's ability in the use of the words, all these are also the play of the energy of the infinite consciousness. The Guru-disciple relationship, it was a very traditional thing in India, possibly still is, and attachments can arise within that. Attachments which are not based on inquiry. And this chapter is about being free of attachments. So even these attachments between disciple and guru must be renounced. All we can ever look for from a teaching is something which directs us to our own attention, something which reflects the attention back on itself. All other teachings about the nature of Brahman and the nature of a liberated person are secondary at best. Bliss and love and all the rest of it are fine, but unless you're actually practicing this spirit of inquiry, then it amounts to nothing from a spiritual point of view. In the peace of one's own inner being, consciousness vibrates and the world vision arises. If that consciousness does not vibrate, there will be no world vision. This talk of vibration can be taken too far when you start talking about different frequencies of existence. But what's meant by vibration is spelled out here. A vibration is something which starts from a point, moves from that point, and comes back to that point, and then repeats and repeats and repeats. So here we go. The mind is but the movement in consciousness. All that can be moving in consciousness is the attention. The non-realization of this truth is world vision. When you start believing there's other stuff going on, and it's not simply the attention doing its thing, then you believe in the world. You believe in the truth of your stories. Non-realization of this truth intensifies and aggravates the movement of thought and consciousness. Thus a cycle is formed. Ignorance and mental activity are perpetuated by each other. It's like having a hyperactive attention. something which many people seem to suffer from these days. And the solution's given, well, let's find something which will make your attention less active. So we start finding other things for the attention to look at in order for it to be less active. So this is the situation we find in, and all that's going to do is actually make the attention more active. And on it goes. This is samsara. When the inner intelligence is awakened, the craving for pleasure ceases. This is the nature of the wise. In other words, there's something worth pursuing here, which puts everything else into the shade. In him, this cessation of craving for pleasure is therefore natural and effortless. We don't get into the traditional yogic idea of somehow suppressing craving, of battling craving. You switch on the light. Rather than run away from the darkness, you switch on the light. And you only know how to switch on the light once you've stumbled upon it in the first place. So it's natural and effortless. Yoga, especially traditional yoga, is normally associated with great effort. But here, through inquiry, the cessation of craving for pleasure is natural and effortless. He knows that it is the energy of the self that experiences the experiences. So we're not splitting the world up into that which must be avoided and that which must be cultivated. We're seeing Brahman in all. We're offering everything up to Brahman. He who, in order to please the public, refuses to experience what is to be experienced, he indeed beats the air with a stick. So if you've established yourself as a yogi or as a guru, then people expect certain behaviour of you, and you cater to that. It's nothing to do with spirituality. One attains self-knowledge by sometimes using appropriate means. So I wonder how this sentence follows on. The paragraph began with when the inner intelligence is awakened. So it's beginning with this initial awakening of the intelligence. This is the beginning of spiritual practice. Craving for pleasure ceases or wanes. The realization that everything is Brahman is strengthened as we offer everything up to Brahman. At this point it is possible to get caught up in being a teacher, being a guru, because the truth of the scriptures has become apparent. But you must be very careful not to get hijacked into that role and start relating to the memory of what you realized. And so we carry on becoming more established in self-knowledge, using whatever means possible. Offering everything up to Brahman, working through the Yoga Vasishta, communicating with others. This paragraph then seems to be about the initial stages of spiritual practice based on renunciation. Desire for liberation interferes with the fullness of the self. Absence of such desire promotes bondage. So we're not using this as our motivating impulse. We're not using desire for liberation as our motivation impulse, because that promotes bondage. All we can do is practice inquiry for its own sake, because we realize that is what leads to the fullness of being. Hence, constant awareness is to be preferred. The sole cause for bondage and liberation is the movement in consciousness. This is the attention. Awareness of this ends this movement. Once we realize the attention is somewhere which is limiting itself, we can draw it back to itself, and in doing so we also appreciate what it's come back to, because we might be aware of all sorts of inner discomfort. The ego sense ceases the very moment one observes it, for it has no support any longer. Then who is bound by whom, or who is liberated by whom? There's pure consciousness. There is the stream of experiencing.